In the heart of West Africa, nestled between rolling hills and lush green forests, lay the village of Abaka. In this quiet village, there lived a girl who was anything but ordinary. Her name was Adana. Adana was the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare. Her skin was as smooth as polished ebony, and her eyes sparkled like the stars on a clear night. She carried herself with a grace that made her seem almost otherworldly. But Adana's beauty was not her only defining trait. She was also known for something far more intimidating: her hatred of men. From a young age, Adana had made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with men. She was strong, both in body and spirit, and had a temper that could ignite like a wildfire. Men who dared to approach her, whether to compliment her beauty or ask for her hand, were met with a fierce resistance. Adana didn't just reject them, she beat them. Her strength was unmatched, and soon, stories of her wrath spread far and wide. The villagers admired her beauty, but feared her temper. Mothers whispered her name to their daughters as a warning, while men avoided her like a storm cloud. Adana's reputation grew, and soon she became a legend in Abaka. A girl as beautiful as she was dangerous. But why did Adana hate men so much? What had happened to make her so fierce, so untouchable? The villagers could only guess, for Adana never spoke of her past. She walked through the village with her head held high, her bright eyes scanning the world with a mix of defiance and sorrow. And so, the mystery of Adana remained, a puzzle no one dared to solve. One sunny morning, Adana visited the village market to buy yams. The market was bustling with activity. Vendors called out to customers, children laughed as they chased each other, and the air was filled with the scent of spices and fresh produce. Adana moved through the crowd with purpose, her eyes focused ahead. But as she turned a corner, a man carrying a large basket of fruits accidentally bumped into her. The collision was slight, but it was enough. Adana's eyes flashed with anger. Without a word, she raised her hand and slapped the man across the face. The sound echoed through the market, and the crowd fell silent. The man stumbled back, clutching his cheek, his basket of fruits tumbling to the ground. "I'm sorry," the man stammered, his voice trembling. "It was an accident, I swear." Adana didn't respond. She simply glared at him, her chest rising and falling with barely contained rage. The man didn't wait for her to say more. He scrambled to pick up his fruits and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. The villagers watched in stunned silence. Whispers began to ripple through the market like a breeze through tall grass. "Did you see that?" one woman muttered to another. "She didn't even let him explain." Another man shook his head. "I've heard stories about her, but I didn't believe them until now." From that day on, Adana's reputation grew even stronger. The villagers spoke of her in hushed tones, their voices a mix of awe and fear. Mothers pulled their children closer when Adana passed by, and men crossed to the other side of the road to avoid her. Adana didn't seem to mind. She carried on with her life, her expression as unreadable as ever, her heart locked away behind walls no one could breach. Despite Adana's fearsome reputation, her beauty was like a magnet, pulling men toward her like moths to a flame. They couldn't help themselves. They whispered among themselves, boasting that they would be the one to win her heart, to break through her icy exterior and make her smile. They believed their charm, their gifts, or their status would be enough to change her. They were wrong. One by one, suitors came forward, each more confident than the last. They brought gifts, gold bracelets, colorful beads, and baskets of the finest fruits. They stood outside her hut, calling her name, reciting poems they had practiced for days. But Adana was unmoved. She saw through their flattery, their gifts, their rehearsed words. To her, they were all the same. Men who wanted to control her, to claim her as their own. Her response was always the same. She would step out of her hut, her eyes blazing, and without a word she would strike. Her hands were swift and strong, her blows precise. The suitors would stagger back, clutching their faces, their gifts forgotten as they fled in terror. Adana didn't just reject them, she humiliated them, leaving no doubt that she would not be won over. Even the chief's son, a young man named Chinedu, was not spared. He was handsome and confident, the pride of the village. He believed his status would protect him, that Adana would see him as different. One evening, he approached her with a golden necklace, a gift fit for a queen. He smiled as he held it out to her, his voice smooth and confident. "Adana," he said, "You are the most beautiful woman in Abaka. This necklace is but a small token of my admiration. I would be honored if you would accept it. And me." Adana stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without warning, she struck. Her fist connected with his jaw, and Chinedu stumbled back, blood trickling from his mouth. He spat out 2 teeth, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Adana didn't say a word. She simply turned and walked back into her hut, leaving the golden necklace lying in the dirt. The elders, the wise men and women of Abaka, decided it was time to intervene. They called a meeting, summoning Adana to the village square. Adana arrived, her head held high, her expression as cold as ever. The elders sat in a circle, their faces stern. "Adana," one of them began, "your behavior is causing unrest in our village. You have attacked many men, even the chief's son. We demand an explanation. Why do you act this way?" Adana stood silently, her arms crossed. She looked at each elder in turn, her eyes hard and unyielding, but she said nothing. The elders waited, their patience wearing thin, but Adana refused to speak. Finally, they dismissed her, their frustration evident. As Adana walked away, the elders exchanged worried glances. They had no answers, no way to understand the girl who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. All they knew was that Adana was a mystery, one that grew deeper with each passing day. One afternoon, Adana went to the stream outside the village to fetch water. The stream was a peaceful place, its clear waters glinting under the sun as they flowed over smooth stones. Adana knelt by the water's edge, filling her clay pot, when suddenly her foot slipped on a wet rock. She fell, scraping her knee against the sharp edge of a stone. Blood trickled down her leg and she winced in pain. A farmer named Emekev, who had been working nearby, noticed her fall. Concerned, he approached her. "Are you all right?" he asked, reaching out to help her up. But Adana's reaction was immediate and fierce. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes blazing with anger. "Don't touch me!" she shouted, swinging her arm. Her fist connected with Emeka's face, and he stumbled back, clutching his nose. Blood streamed through his fingers as he stared at her in shock. "I was only trying to help," Emeka protested, his voice muffled by his hand. Adana didn't respond. She grabbed her water pot and stormed away, leaving Emeka standing by the stream, bewildered and bleeding. The story of the incident spread quickly through the village. The villagers shook their heads, their fear of Adana growing even stronger. "She's like a wild animal," one woman said. "You can't even try to help her without getting hurt." But not everyone was afraid of Adana. The village prince, a young man named Kofi, had heard the stories about her. Unlike the others, he wasn't intimidated. In fact, he was intrigued. Kofi was known for his kindness and his gentle nature, and he believed that Adana's anger came from a place of pain. He decided to try to win her over, not with force or flattery, but with patience and understanding. Kofi began by sending small gifts to Adana: a basket of ripe mangoes, a beautifully woven shawl, a carved wooden comb. He didn't approach her directly. Instead, he left the gifts outside her hut, hoping she would see them as gestures of goodwill. Adana ignored the gifts at first, but Kofi didn't give up. He continued to send them, each one accompanied by a note with a simple message: "You are not alone." One day, Kofi decided to speak to Adana in person. He found her near the edge of the village, where she often went to be alone. "Adana," he said softly, "I know you don't trust men, but I want you to know that I'm not like the others. I care about you." Adana turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "You don't know me," she said coldly. Kofi took a step closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. It was a small gesture, meant to show her that he meant no harm, but for Adana, it was too much. Her body tensed, and before Kofi could react, she struck. Her fists flew, landing blow after blow until Kofi was on the ground, his face bruised and bloodied. The villagers who witnessed the attack were horrified. The prince, their kind and gentle prince, had been beaten by Adana. The news spread like wildfire, and soon the entire village was talking about it. Adana's reputation as a dangerous, untouchable woman was solidified. But Kofi, even as he nursed his wounds, couldn't bring himself to hate her. He knew there was more to her story, something deeper that drove her anger, and he was determined to find out what it was. The attack on Prince Kufi was the final straw. The villagers were outraged, and the news reached the ears of the king, Kufi's father. The king was a wise and just ruler, but even he could not ignore such an act of violence against his own son. He summoned Adana to the royal court, demanding an explanation. The entire village gathered to witness the confrontation. Adana stood before the king, her head held high, her expression as unreadable as ever. The king sat on his throne, his face stern. "Adana," he began, his voice echoing through the court, "you have attacked many men in this village, including my son. I demand to know why. What drives you to such anger?" Adana remained silent, her eyes fixed on the ground. The court waited, the tension thick in the air. The king leaned forward, his voice softening slightly. "Adana, I do not wish to punish you without understanding, but you must explain yourself. Why do you hate men so much?" For a long moment, Adana said nothing. Then, slowly, her shoulders began to shake. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she clenched her fists, as if fighting to hold back the flood of emotions that had been buried deep inside her for so long. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling with pain and anger. "My father," she began, "was a cruel man. He beat my mother every day, for no reason other than his own anger. She was kind and gentle, but he treated her like an animal. One day, when she was pregnant with my younger brother, he beat her so badly that she died. She died, and my brother died with her." The court fell silent, the villagers listening in shock. Adina's voice grew stronger as she continued. "After my mother's death, my uncles took me in, but they were no better. They treated the women in their household like slaves, beating them and controlling every aspect of their lives. I swore to myself that I would never let a man control me, never let a man hurt me the way they hurt my mother and the other women. That is why I hate men. That is why I will..." Tears streamed down Adana's face as she finished speaking. The court was silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. The king sat back in his throne, his expression a mix of sorrow and understanding. He had not expected such a story, such pain behind Adana's anger. "Adana," the king said gently, "I am sorry for what you have endured. No one should have to suffer as you have, but you must understand that not all men are like your father and uncles. There are men who respect women, who would never harm them. My son, Kofi, is one of them. He only wanted to help you, to understand you." Adana looked at the king, her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, her expression softened, the walls around her heart beginning to crack. The king's words had touched something deep inside her, something she had buried for so long. The villagers watched in silence, their fear of Adana replaced by a deep sense of pity and respect. They had not known the pain she carried, the reasons behind her anger, and now, as they listened to her story, they began to understand. Adana's story shook the village of Abaka to its core. The men, who had once whispered about her in fear, now felt a deep sense of shame. They realized how their actions, whether through silence or complicity, had contributed to the suffering of women like Adana and her mother. The women, on the other hand, looked at Adana with newfound respect. She had become a symbol of strength, a reminder that they too could stand up against injustice. Prince Kofi, still recovering from his injuries, asked to speak with Adana. He approached her with humility, his face bruised but his eyes filled with sincerity. "Adana," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I am truly sorry for what happened. I never meant to make you feel threatened or disrespected. I only wanted to show you that not all men are like the ones who hurt you. I promise to respect you, to honor you, and to never try to control you." Adana listened quietly, her walls slowly crumbling as she saw the genuine remorse in Kofi's eyes. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that perhaps not all men were the same. She nodded slowly, accepting his apology. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but respect is not something you can just promise. It's something you must prove." Kofi smiled gently. "And I will, every day, if you let me." The king, moved by Adana's story and the transformation it sparked in the village, made a bold declaration. Standing before the entire village, he announced, "From this day forward, no man in Abaka will mistreat a woman. Those who do will face severe punishment. We will honor the strength and dignity of our women, and we will ensure that no one suffers as Adana and her mother did." He then turned to Adana's uncles, who had been brought before the court. "You have caused great pain and suffering," the king said sternly. "For your cruelty you will be banished from Abaka. May you learn from your mistakes and never harm another woman again." The villagers cheered, their voices rising in unity. It was a new beginning for Abaka, a village that had been transformed by Adana's courage and the king's wisdom. As for Adana, she began to heal. The weight of her past slowly lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. She agreed to marry Prince Kofi, not out of obligation, but because she saw in him a man who truly respected her. Their marriage was built on mutual understanding and equality, a partnership that inspired the entire village. Adana's story became a legend in Abaka, passed down through generations as a tale of courage, resilience, and the power of change. She had not only transformed her own life, but had also sparked a revolution in her village, a revolution of respect, equality, and love.